Alright, what's up everyone? We're doing another tutorial video. This one's going to be on user input service, which is a way for you to have the user input some action key, whatever, into your game. And this is one method where you can have the user have key binds and all that. The other one is context action service, which I'll look at later because that's more advanced. But this one should get you started, and hopefully you have a use for this, and that's why you're here. So, for now, what I'm going to do is go through some basic setup. So we're going to create the event for the user input service. So I'll show you what ones are available and what ones you can use for what. And then I'll take you to the API, or I might do it the other way around, and we'll have a look what we can see and what we can use. So I've got the API open here. I've got it on the page. And on the front here, there's user input service right there. If it's not there, just search it up, user input service. And it should come up. The user input service is a service used to detect the type of input available on a user's device via the use of a local script. So, as I talked before, we've got the filtering enabled. You have the client and you've got the server. User input service is client only, so you have to use this in a local script. So the primary purpose of this is to allow for games to cooperate with multiple forms of available input. Gamepads, touchscreens, keyboards. So there's different different devices you can use to control your character, and key codes and all that, or keybinds and all that. So this is one way that you can actually set that up. So if we have a look here, we've got some properties. We've got accelerometer. So that's, I believe, how fast your device is moving. There's, whether a gamepad's enabled or a gamepad's available, sorry. You got gyroscope, you got keyboard enabled, all of that. You can have a look through these and see what there is. Some of them are read-only, do note that. So not all of them you can actually change. And some of them are hidden, so you actually can't use them anyways. So under here, though, what we're going to be using is under the events. So even though there's all of this, we're going to do the basics. We're going to get down to where the events are, and we want to have it so when we press a key, so in our case, when we input something, so when it input began, we want to trigger some method or something. And then we also can have input ended. We've got input changed. We've got even jump request, which I'll set up here too. And there is some other stuff here, but I probably won't do them. I'll do touch ended and touch. Where is it? Touch pinch, touch started. That's the one. We can try some of these touch tap too. We'll give them a go. But for now, let's get the input begin and set up, and we'll try that. So under the startup player scripts, this is where we're going to put our local script. I'm going to call this user input. And let's start with getting the user input service. So local user input service equals game get service user input service. And then we have our events, which we're going to look at, which were the input began, input changed, input ended, and then the touch and the what was the other one? Touching mobile device, and what was the other one? Jump request. That's the one. We'll also look at jump request. But for now, let's do user input service input began. We're going to connect that to a function, and in the arguments we have a input, which is an input object. So we'll have a look at that, and we have a boolean, which is the game processed event, and that pretty much determines whether or not any UI or any context action service callbacks have processed this. So we can use that to determine whether or not we press keybinds or something, and we can have this run even past keybinds. So we'll have a look at them. For now, we're just going to print both of them, so we're going to have a look at what they are. Actually, I'm just going to run that straight to print. So we know our arguments are input object and has processed. You can run it straight to print, so you don't actually need to create a function. You just connect to print. Otherwise, you can do connect function, input object has processed, and then you can print input object and the has processed boolean. So we've got input began, we've got also input changed. So let's do the exact same thing. Input changed, connect function, the input, or the arguments. So what the function receives are the input and the game process event. So that's input object and boolean. Let's copy and paste this function. Connect, whoops, function. And let's have a look at InputEnded. Connect function. So it says input, game process event, same things. But even though they are the same things, because of the event that they're connected to, they have different uses and they trigger at different times. So it's important that you remember that, depending on the event, even if they've got the same arguments, the event determines when it will run. So we've got all of them. Let's also do user input service dot jump request connect function. So jump request doesn't have any arguments, so that's just when you try and jump using the mobile button, using your spacebar, this will run. So we can just print jump request. Now let's also do touch. We can test this using the device emulator in the top right here. I'll go over that. User input service dot touch tap. So if I want to use a taps their finger on a touch enabled device, such as the screen of a mobile device. Connect function, what does that give us? It gives us a table of touch positions. So I'm assuming that'd be vector 2s. So X and Y position, and a game process event boolean like the input change, input began, whatever. Let's have a look at them. So we've got touch positions has processed, and we're just going to print them also. User input service. What other touch ones are there? We've got touch tap in world. That one you can pretty much where they click on the screen, you can raycast from where they click into the world. That might be useful for some of your cases. You can have like the example code. We'll go over that. No, we won't go over that. That's a little bit longer. Touch ended. So if I want a user releases their finger from the screen on a touch-enabled device, such as a screen of a mobile device, let's also do that one. So that's pretty much the input ended, but for touch. The arguments are the touch input objects and the game process event. So we'll have the exact same arguments and the print input object and has processed, like the input began, change, ended connections. So now that we've got all of these set up, I'm going to categorize them. So this one is mobile. We have any. So any is jump request because mobile can request to jump through the jump button, and keyboard can jump through the space, and gamepad can jump through the, I think it's A key. I don't have my gamepad, but I'm pretty sure it's the A key anyways. And as a matter of fact, we can actually look at the console ones, or gamepad, which is the user input service. And we have a couple here. We've got gamepad connected, gamepad disconnected. And I believe under the input began and input changed, input ended, we'll see that in a minute. But the key code and the user input type will change depending on what device you use. So what do I mean by that? We're going to figure out when we print these. So let's just leave it at that. We've just got all the connections that just print whatever is going in them. And we're just going to play the game and see what happens. So right now, it's just printing a heap of things. So if I move my mouse, you can see that it's actually printing. And it's line 8. So let's just disable line 8 for the moment. This is under the input changed one. And the reason for that is because my mouse moves, it counts as an input change. So we'll go back to the input change so we can have a look at what the mouse is doing. But for now, we're just going to disable that so we can actually test the input began, input ended, and the mobile stuff without interference from that. So right now, I'm moving my mouse around, and it looks like it's triggering when I go in and out of the screen. So there's something there. If I left click, it also triggers it. If I right click, triggers it. If I press any key on my keyboard, that triggers it. If I press spacebar, we've got the jump requests and also the input object. So we can see that when I do things on my keyboard, it triggers the functions. And if I actually go inside the script, Let's have a look at this let's have a look at this input object here. So I'm going to disable everything but the InputBegan one. What can we do with this input object? Well, let's go to the API reference and have a look at the input object. So under TouchEnded here, there's an input object instance you can click. Or objects, yeah, an instance. So this tells us that an input object represents a single user input, such as mouse movement, which was causing the mass amount of updates, touches, key presses, and more. It is created when an input begins. In this case, it's not just begins, it's also ended, changed, whatever. So each kind of input will undergo various changes to its user input state. So we need to look at that property. During the lifetime of an input, other properties will further describe the input. Other properties may change. Other properties which further describe the input may change, such as the position and delta. We'll look at them. That's just the mouse position and your scroll wheel, if it's up or down. So keyboard and gamepad button presses will have the key code property set. So we'll need to look at the key code so we can see what we're clicking and all that. So once created at the beginning of an input, the same object persists and is updated until the input ends. As a result, you can track the object's changes using the changed event. And yeah. So let's look at properties here. We've got delta, a vector3 delta describing the delta movement between the mouse joystick movements. Okay, we can have a look at that. Keycode contains an enum, so enum.material.grass, so an enumeration of some state value, whatever. That describes the kind of input used. So that will let us know the key bind that we press, or like key that we press, so Q, E, R, escape, whatever. We'll have a look at that. We've got a vector3 position, describes a positional value of this input. We'll have to see what that one talks about. User input state, describes the state of an input being performed, following a specific flow depending on the user input type. So this user input state will depend on the user input type. So we'll need to keep that in mind. User input type, which is a type of user input type, describes the kind of input being performed. Mouse, keyboard, gamepad, touch. So we need to look at that one to see what we are doing, or what key device is actually running or triggering this event. So let's look at that one first. So let's have a look at user input type. So that is a property of input object. So in our InputBegan, our first argument is the input object, which is a type of user input object. So what we can do is let's just comment out that original print. Let's do print input object dot, and we're going to see all the properties. We're going to print out the user input type, and we'll also print out the key code, input object dot key code. So let's have a look at what those give us when we load into the game. Remember, I've commented everything else but the InputBegan. So it will only show InputBegan stuff. So under here, I got mouse movement, and the key code is unknown. So this is just mouse movement. It's not going to show up here. We've also got enum.userinputType.mouseButton3. So that is me clicking my scroll wheel down. If I left click, we've got mouse button 1 as a user input type. If I right click, mouse button 2. So now we know what our mouse is. Left click is mouse button 1. Right click is mouse button 2. Scroll click is mouse button 3. If I press spacebar, we have user input type keyboard, and that is enum.keycode.space. So that is giving us the key that we pressed on our keyboard, which in this case I'm pressing space. If I press A, we've got user input type keyboard, key code A. So that's me pressing the A key and D key. So just from this, you can see what I'm talking about here. InputBegan, we are starting to press a key. Let's go over to the input script again. Since the InputEnded has the same arguments that are passed through the function, let's just pass the exact same print there. So let's remove this print. So we're going to print the input object user input type and the input object key code. So we're going to see what we pressed and what we released. So if I press A, if I press A, it says keyboard key code A. If I release A, it says the same thing again, but the line count is different. One is on line 5 and the other one is on line 10. The reason for that is we've got InputBegan and InputEnded, so they print on 2 different lines. Inside the print statement, I'm going to add InputBegan as a string, and I'm going to separate them with commas. And I'm going to do InputEnded under the InputEnded function or event. And this will help us differentiate between what's InputBegan and what's InputEnded. So we know whether or not we're starting to press a key or if we're releasing a key. So we're InputEnding. So if I press A, we've got InputBegan, input type keyboard, and key code A. If I release A, we've got InputEnded, keyboard, key code A. So I'm starting to press it, and then I'm releasing it. Next, let's have a look at InputChanged. So this one was to do with the mouse and how things change. So I'm going to print, let's just copy that InputEnded one, and I'm going to say InputChanged, the input object.userInputType, and the input object.keycode. Let's also print the input object.position and input object dot what's the other one? Delta. Let's see what the delta is. So if we play that, error. What errored? Oh, the multi-line comment. Whoops. Let me fix that up. There we go. So we've got our input changed only active. Now let's see what that gives us. So right here, I'm moving my mouse around. We can get the user input type of that, which is mouse movement. And our key code is unknown. But now that we're printing our position, I can see where my mouse is on the screen. If I go outside the game, however, it stops updating. And if I come back in the game, it's updating again. So we've got our mouse moving now, which is cool. However, we're not getting any other values in the delta. So let me just scroll up. So I'm scrolling in. We've got that 1 now after that last one there. So what is that 1 representing? So if I'm scrolling forward, it's 1. If I scroll backwards, it's -1. So this represents this direction that I'm scrolling my mouse wheel. So if I scroll in, it's 1. If I scroll out, it's -1. So that might be useful for some of you. You can have a look at that. But right now, I want to block this mouse movement because that's annoying as all hell. So here, when I scroll, we have a mouse wheel user input type. But here, when I'm moving my mouse, we have a mouse movement user input type. So what if I want to blacklist mouse movement? So that way I don't see that when it updates. Let's do that. Line 13. Let's go inside the input changed event and let's say input object. So if input object dot user input type. So if the type of input is equal to enum dot user input type dot mouse movement, then return. So that's saying if the user input type of our input is mouse movement, we want to return. We don't want to continue with the event. We don't want to do any code below that point. So that pretty much makes it so if it's mouse movement, that's input changing. Just ignore all the code and just return straight away. If it's not mouse movement, we want to print the input changed on the next line. So now if we try that again, if I try and move my mouse around, we're not getting any prints. But if I scroll in, we're getting that print there. And if I move my mouse around, you can see that the position is updating in the output. But it's not printing when I move my mouse around now. And if we have a look at the scroll wheel here, -1 is going out, 1's going in. Now let's say I want to do the opposite. Let's say I only want to print when my mouse moves. Instead of doing is equal to, we can do does not equal to. So if the input type does not equal to the mouse movement, we just want to return. If it is mouse movement, we want to print input changed and then all the different values. Or all the different properties out of the input object. So if I'm moving my mouse, you can see that spam updating. If I scroll in, it doesn't update. If I move my mouse again, it's updating. So there we go. So that's the user input, 3 different ones here. We've got InputBegan, InputEnded, InputChanged. That is for gamepad, and that is for keyboard. That is not mobile. Mobile, you have to do some other things. So let's just delete these 3 now. So actually, a matter of fact, if you do inputObject.keycode and you want to say, I want to allow specific key codes to run, you want to do is equal to enum.keycode.whatever key. And for gamepad devices, you'll have button Y, button A, button B, button X, button L1, button L2, L3, R1, R2, R3, start select. So those are the different keybinds for gamepad. If you want to do VR stuff, you'll have to look at the VR service. However, there is still a VR key or user input types, I believe. Let me just check that. .VR. Yeah, so VR touchpad, I believe, is 1. And then also, I believe VR goes under the button Y. You have to check that. I can't check it right now because I don't have my VR headset. But I believe it does go under user input service. Otherwise, it'll be under the VR service for sure. Alright, so as I said, let's clear those 3. So now we're up to the mobile stuff. So our first one was user input service.touchTap connect function touch positions, comma, has processed. So let's just print what touch positions give us, and we'll check what has processed, like the value of it. So in the top right here, I've got the device emulator, and we're going to pick the iPhone XR. Make sure it's fit to window, and let's play solo. And we're just going to click on the screen because that means we've touched on the screen. So right here we've got our table. It gave us a position, and it's pretty much where we touch on the screen, which is pretty nice. So from what I can see going up, that is changing the Y value there towards 0. And if we go left, it's towards 0. So the top left corner where 0, 0 is top left of your screen here. So if I click in the very top left, we've got 0 minus 31, so it's like right there. And if I go to the bottom right and click, we've got 827, 370. So if you want to do some mobile device support, you can use TouchTap. Otherwise, there is also TouchTap in world, which I talked about. And the argument for that is you're given a vector2 position. So that's where you actually tapped on your screen. And I'm not going to show it here, but you can change it to array. And then you can raycast from where they click. If I do that, you can see that it's printing the exact same thing. The difference is TouchTap in world only supports 1 tap at a time, while TouchTap lets you do multiple taps at a time. Now let's go to TouchEnded. So this is like InputEnded when you release. Input object is the first argument. So when you release your touch, it will call this function. The first argument is input object. Second argument is has it processed. And just like before, we're going to print the user input type and the key code. So if I click down, nothing happens. If I release my left mouse, we get the function called. The user input type is touch. The key code is unknown and it's not processed, so it's false for that argument. And that's pretty much all there is to that. As we saw, we've done the jump request. So that's when I was trying to press spacebar. It would say print jump request. So if I just run through that again. And actually we can do it on a mobile device. So if I press space on my keyboard, we get the jump request. If I press this jump button here, we get jump requests. So you can use that however you want. I believe to override the Roblox one, you have to use starter_GUI:setcore. You might have to search that up though. I probably won't show it here. But moving on, let's have a look at the API again. There's other functions that you might find useful. So a good one, as an example, would be the where is it? I believe it should be here. Wait for char, no. Oh, okay, I guess they don't have it here. Oh, so that's input object, that's why. Let's jump to user input service. So under user input service, there is a function called keydown, is keydown. So you can check whether or not the player is currently holding a enum.keycode down. So like if you want to say while user input service : is keydown enum.keycode.q do whatever code. Also you need to include a wait. So that's one thing you can do there. You can also do is gamepad button down, but you have to pass in the gamepad user input type for that one. So if we have a look at the enum.user input type and I type in gamepad, you can see that there's more than one gamepad. So it actually lets you support multiple gamepads at once. That's what this other function also comes in use for. So get supported gamepad keycodes, returns an array of keycodes that the gamepad associated with the given user input type supports. You can get strings for keycode, navigation pads, mouse location, mouse delta. You can have a look at these, you can print them out. I think you sort of get the idea though. There's also get connected gamepads, that's another very useful one. Then there's other events, which is which I talked about before with the user C-frame. So that's VR devices. That's one of them there. But there is also gamepad connected and gamepad disconnected, which I showed before, and that gives you the user input type .gamepad1, gamepad2, whatever connected. But yeah, hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight to user input service. I believe the context action service one is not for a little while. Yeah, no, like another 12 tutorials. But it's sort of similar. It's a little bit like different to set up though. You can set up mobile buttons through that though, which is kind of important. So I should probably bring that closer to user input service, but that's fine. And yeah, hopefully I have gone through enough of this and you've learned it, or you've picked up some things that you might want to try and play around with. But that should be plenty for now. I'll see you guys in the next video, which should be the camera manipulations one, which will be great fun. So, I'll see you then.